So, Brad, I have kind of an amazing story from this weekend to share with you regarding parenting choices. You ready for this one?
My favorite topic, yes.
Yeah, here we go. So have you ever had this as a dad where you have some sort of family activity where you're just like, the kids love it, so I'll do it. I don't want to do this. I have no desire to do this, but
yes,
okay, here we go.
You're smiling through gritted teeth the entire time.
Yeah,
yes, I'm familiar.
You are doing your most blessedness, trying to be like, oh, we're having a lot of fun, aren't we, gang? I don't want to be doing this. Like, for example, the other day we went on a Ferris wheel down at the Santa Monica Pier. I hate Ferris wheels. I hate heights. So everyone's like, Daddy, why do you have a 1,000-yard stare in your face? It's like, well, that's because Daddy's palms are sweating because he's terrified of heights. Daddy has a fight or flight response and is actively trying not to go comatose on this ride. Anyway, so this past weekend, we go to this thing. A cousin invited us for a whole big family fun adventure to a thing called Great Wolf Lodge. Have you ever heard of this, Brad?
I've never heard of Great Wolf Lodge, no.
Okay, so it is apparently a whole chain of them. I have never heard of them before this weekend. A whole chain of indoor water parks across the U.S. and Canada.
Oh, God. Okay, I'm with you.
And so, yeah, the whole time, the whole time I'm saying to my wife, and actually she to me, she's like, we're like, I don't want to do this. This is going to feel slimy. Everything's going to be wet. It's all going to be like, it's going to be 1,000 human naked bodies touching things. I don't want to be in this. And we get down there, and sure enough, it is a cathedral built to E. coli, Brad. It is. It is. First of all, I do have to say, the engineering in this place was amazing.
Yeah.
Think of like a hangar built to build a 737 or a 747, like a gigantic, like the biggest kind of indoor space that a human being can build with a one continuous roof line, right? So it's gigantic steel beams that are just massive, and the inside of this thing is like 7 stories, maybe 8 stories high, right? But it's all one continuous roof. It's gigantic, and inside there is like a multi-story tower that you can go down slides. There's a giant wave pool. There's inner tube slides that you can go down with the whole family, like all 4 of you in a gigantic tube.
Yeah.
There's a wave rider where it makes fake waves so you can surf or body surf or boogie board. All that sort of stuff, right? All that you would expect. But, like, I'm like, all right, kids, well, let's go. Even though we live literally 2 steps from the Pacific Ocean, let's go into this wave pool. So we walk over to the wave pool. Nope, some kids pooped in it. All right, that's shut down.
Oh, no, jeez.
And we're like, all right, well, let's go over to Splash Town or whatever it's called. And it's like, oh, all right, that'll be fun. It's got a nope, some kid pooped in that. That's closed. So all my worst fears were affirmed by like, nope, everybody's pooping everywhere in here, and we're all sharing this water. How delightful.
And then Dave goes to the men's room completely empty.
Yeah, and clean as a whistle. No one's used it. No one's used it for years. Like, no, I'll just pee in this pond. This is fine. This is fine.
Oh, God, it's water. It's the same
water.
thing.
This feels
the same
fine.
idea. There's so much chlorine, it's not going to hurt anybody. Right?
Yeah, to whatever engineer's credit is, this place, the engineering, brilliant.
Yeah.
Like the industrial fans that keep the air moving, the use of industrial chlorines that are not overwhelming but are still cleaning the hell out of that water, great, amazing. The pumps that were involved to move this much water at this place was amazing.
Yeah.
And the engineering in terms of designing slides, all that amazing. But I want to ask you this, though, as Brad, as an artist, as a fellow artist, do you ever notice a project, like a family-oriented project, where clearly the engineers were in charge and they did not involve artists?
Yeah. So it was all about the building and nothing about the grace.
Yeah, and so this is kind of my beef also with Six Flags Magic Mountain or Six Flags, the Six Flags parks around the U.S., is that clearly the engineers take the lead and there's no artists involved. Whereas Disney, with their Imagineers, they are so amazing about like, no, it's going to be a holistic feel. The engineering is going to work with the art, and the art is going to work with the marketing, and the marketing is going to work with the groundskeeping, and it's all going to create a holistic feel, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this place, it would be like these amazing, huge steel I-beams, right, that are fantastic to look at. But then it's like, oh, but we slapped a coat of fun blue on it, so now it's for kids,
Yeah, it's still got all the sharp, pointy corners. It's still got all of that stuff, and it's still at the heart of it a steel beam, but it's got a really nice coat of paint on it.
Yeah, there's no whimsy to it. You know what I mean? There's and the whimsy that was done was clearly hired out by like whatever affordable art team they could hire in India or South Korea or something. You know, where it's like it's okay, it's kind of okay, but it's not like it's not Disney level. It's like Walmart designed a theme park. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it went to the lowest bidder, and
that's exactly
what you've got.
Yeah. Well, and more importantly than lowest bidder, you could just tell that the whatever lead engineer was in charge. Like, I mean, I guess we got to sugarcoat this a little bit. How about we put a bear over here? Here's a bear. It's a water park with a bear.
There.
Yeah. What do you want? What do you want out of us? Look, we designed this amazing water park. We're engineers. I don't know. Let's paint it blue. There we go. We're done.
Yeah, they've gotten to it's the part of the project that they were interested in, and now the rest of it is the boringest thing in the world. And it's just like, just fine, just put something over there. Let me get back to building my next indoor E. coli museum.
Cathedral, Brad, to E. coli.
Cathedral, yes.
It's like the spend budget was, all right, $80 million on engineering, $500,000 on art.
Not even that. $80 million on engineering and a $50 gift certificate to Sherwin-Williams.
There was also at one point when you're walking in, there's animatronics, and there's nothing as a dad. There's nothing worse than sad animatronics.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
where the lips don't. Not only is there no articulation in the lips, but it's basically just one servo motor lifting a mouth every once in a while, and like there's no syncing up between audio and movement.
Yeah,
so,
it's the Showbiz Pizza kind of animatronics.
Oh my God, Brad! It's exactly Showbiz Pizza. Holy shit! They just repurposed the gorilla on the keyboards and they turned him into the bear at the water park.
Yeah, gave him a bathing suit and let it go.
Just smear a little E. coli on him and we're off to the races. But that being said, so I did actually have fun. Like for about an hour or two on the water slides themselves, I was giggling like a fiend. There is a unique joy to a water slide that's really well designed, and the water slides were amazing. I just feel bad that human nature being what it is, you can't go into a major body of water that's filled with 100 small kids because one of them is actively pooping as you're in that water. You know,
one of them. You've got dozens of them pooping at any one time across that hangar. Now, my question is, did they have the deals where you slide through the tubes? Like they've got water tubes that you slide through?
Yeah, the majority of them were, I don't want to say the majority of them, half of them were water tubes, and the other ones were water half tubes, I guess is another way of saying it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. The water tubes make me super nervous.
Oh, really?
Because it seems like it would be really easy for somebody to get clogged in there and to have somebody else come barreling right down after them and cause like a massive... it's like clogging a drain, you know?
While I understand that anxiety, that's the fear that Andre the Giant is in front of you in line. Like,
yes, or worse yet, Andre the Giant is in front of you and King Kong Bundy is behind you.
King Kong Bundy! What a reference! George the Animal Steel coming up third on that one.
And you're just in the middle getting pancaked.
Like, hi, I'm Brad Geiger with my inner tube. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Oh no, I'm stuck behind Andre the Giant. Oh no, here comes me, George the Animal Steel. Yeah. No, so it is perhaps the sad truth of Americana that before you get on the family inner tube, which is probably 10 feet a wide tube, you have to collectively stand on a giant industrial scale.
To
make sure that you don't get their tolerances. And there was one family that was like, oh, we're fine. And they stepped on the scale and they're like, we got to split you up. It's funny how the little lies you tell yourself, like, no, we don't weigh that. Oh God, we do weigh that much. All right.
This is going to be just fine. Don't worry about it. We don't even hardly need the scale. Don't worry about it. And you get on it and you just hear a woo-ga, woo-ga.
But as my wife was saying, if there's ever a time where you don't want to test the tolerances of something, it's when you're 400 feet in the air in a giant PVC tube, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the time when you take the easy way out and say, you know what, I'm not going to go up there. It's probably best
or you
not
just go,
to
you know
test
what,
this.
my ego can take the hit. I'll go down this tube by myself. The rest of the family can go by themselves over there. That's fine.
My ego can take the hit. My spine, maybe not so much.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that note, my friends, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Comic Lab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Guigar, editor of Webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. So we've got a bunch of topics to dive right into this week, submitted from Patreon backers. So I'm going to throw the first one out to you, my friend, from Andrew Fraser, and or maybe it's Fraser. There's no I in there. So Andrew Fraser. Andrew, I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. Andrew, either Fraser or Fraser. I think it's Fraser. All right. So, hey guys, while rearranging my studio space and doing some long overdue cleaning, I was listening to a TED Talk about creative disruption. The idea was that you can jumpstart creativity by drastically upheaving your work environment. I already know that every now and again I need to rearrange furniture to keep myself from knocking people's hats off. Do either of you reshuffle the deck chairs to keep from sinking into the murky depths of the creative abyss? Brad, this is a great question with a lot of wrinkles into it. What do you think, Brad? Is it worth upheaving your studio every once in a while, moving things around, shuffling where you hang art or what art is hanging, moving a desk closer or farther from a window, aiming yourself in a different part of the room? What do you think, Brad? Thoughts?
No. Listen, here's the deal. Out of all the things to take your time up with, cleaning your studio every now and again is a good idea. But there's so much about this for the most part that I just think is impractical. Like, in other words, I don't doubt that if you rearrange your studio, maybe you feel a little bit more creative or something, or maybe you think you do. I don't doubt that that's either true or there's a placebo thing. But I'm looking around at my studio, and everything is where it is because that's where it needs to be. I've planned it out. I've designed it, and I'm just thinking about, okay, what if I move this the bookshelf over here, and I move the desk over there? Well, if I move the desk over there, and now it's not near the connection for the cable internet. Now I got to figure out how to run the cable and the internet over there, and then I've got this open space over here that's going to be awkward because nothing else fits it. Everything is in its place right now. I know where to find everything. The very idea of changing it makes me angry. It's giving me the shakes. It's like, don't change everything. I got it the way I want it. The only place I'm willing to go with you is that I do enjoy, even now more than ever in the last couple of years, I enjoy collecting original art and receiving original art from people. I've gotten some originals from some people over the last couple of years, and I like now being able to frame that and hang that on the wall, and that gives me a very happy sense. But moving things around now that I just got them where they are, they're either where they are because they're supposed to be there or because they have to be there. And you can stop laughing right now, mister.
No, listen,
Go ahead.
Well, what's funny about this is, okay, so first of all, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I find it delightful the way you're pitching this. Like, everything is in its place and it needs to be in that place. And I don't understand, Mother, why we need to move this. My pencils are all lined up and I don't no one touch my things. My things are where they need to be. And if I were to move that printer, I'd have to move 2.4 more inches to grab that piece of paper when it prints out. And that's just intolerable to a Brad Geiger.
You're not wrong. Everything you just said is exactly how I feel. It's not, I mean, I know you think you're exaggerating, but you're not. That's exactly what's going on inside my head.
No, I mean, listen, okay, so let's talk about how I agree with you. I do agree with you that once you professionalize your workspace, and by that I mean, like, you get all your ducks in a row. The printer is here because of X, Y, and Z. The desk face this way because the light falls across my paper this way, so that's why I do that.
Right.
The art is hung this way because I need need to refer to my calendar over here, right? So all that is professionalizing your space so that there's efficiency, so that there's things can move smoothly. I get that. All right.
Yeah.
It's like when you organize your kitchen drawers so that you're not constantly having to walk across the kitchen to get the knives. They're right by the dishwasher, that whatever it is.
Exactly.
That kind of thing. So, so yes, I agree with you, but I think taking a slightly different tack on this question, at some points in my career, for example, when I moved house I guess it's a little over a year now, I set up an entirely new studio for the first time in 6 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, my studio had been in a fixed setup rather, at the old place. So it's been 5 years since I had a drastic change. And I did notice actually, and I don't know whether the phrase would be an uptick in creativity or just an uptick in happiness as I walked into the space because it felt different, right?
Yeah.
But that's a different equation, I think, than creativity. That's just like, oh, I'm living in a new home and I've got a new studio. And oh, doesn't the art look different when it's hung up in this space versus the other space? And oh, my desk really works well in here. And oh, I love the morning light in here, whatever that feeling is.
Yeah, the morning light is nice in your studio. I did notice that while I stayed there.
Well, thank you. Oh, what a moment of sweetness. But anyway, but I also do know this, that on occasions when I go out to a coffee shop, sometimes changing my location jars completely different lines of thought.
Yes.
So I get where this question is coming from.
Yes.
But at the same time, I've also had it where if I'm forced to change up my studio or forced because say a lot of stuff had to temporarily be stored in my studio, or someone was staying at my house too long and drinking all my whiskey, say. Let's say
for argument's sake, hypothetically, yes.
And that person was not petting my dog, and it was making me upset. Anyway, no. Let's say that I had a disruption in my studio. I've equally had it where I just want to work in my space the way I know it should be worked in. That kind of thing. Right. So I actually agree with Brad that I prefer a professional space where things are where they are, and it's that because there's a reason.
Yeah.
And when I do find myself needing to change up my creative mental space, I find it's frankly easier logistically to just get up and go somewhere or read something different or watch something new than it is to be like, hey, Brad, help me move this desk to the other side of the room.
Exactly. And here's the problem with that is that as you're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, as it were, as you're rearranging your studio, stuff like that, if you're really going to do it right, that's going to be a couple hours work. I mean, because now you've got wires that you've got to rerun. You've got all kinds of stuff that you've got to rejuggle, and you kind of turn into a situation where you're putting way more time into this redesigning your studio than you thought you would. And while you're doing all that, I'm in my studio that looks about the same as it did when I opened up the doors a couple of years ago, and I'm getting comics done. I don't like this idea of spending time on things that is wasted time. I don't like wasted time. And so if I'm in a situation where I'm not feeling creative, I'm going to be much more apt to do like what Dave said, go to a coffee shop, change my scenery, than I am to start rearranging desks and furnitures. Don't you agree?
No, I do agree. In fact, the longer we talk about this, the more I realize that the reason why I never changed my studio for 5 years in the old place is because it's a tremendous waste of time.
Yes.
Like I would rather make another Sheldon book or get to work on another project than be like, I'm going to move this desk. And you made one passing comment, Brad, that I just want to note because it's so true about modern life. If you move one piece of key electronics in your office, the trouble is not moving the physical electronics. The trouble is redoing the wires, which takes a half an hour to feed them up the back of a bookshelf or get them through whatever little hole you've drilled through the back of a piece of wood, or feeding them underneath a heavy object or around a heavy object. That part takes a half an hour. Moving the object, the electronics, takes 5 seconds, and then the wires are another half an hour on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah. In other words, I got things the way I want it. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
The Brad Geiger story.
I like that as an idea. Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
I finally got things the way I want them. Not just deal with it.
Well, now speaking of people saying "leave me alone," I've got a question, Brad, for us about our fathers in light of Father's Day.
Yes.
And how was that for transition?
Yeah,
I hope that was
a good one. That's a good one.
All right. So, Brad, this comes into, so again, this was for Father's Day, and this comes in from Curious Borg, and it says, greetings, dog-loving Brad Geiger and turtle-touching Dave Kellett. All right, well, that's, I feel like we could say it better than turtle-touching. That feels like.
That does sound like there's more of a story behind that than there actually is.
Yeah, that feels like I'm no longer allowed into the state of Alabama. That's what that feels like. Anyway, all right, so here's the question. With Father's Day upon us, could each of you share a moment or memory that embodies your dad's unique sense of humor and share how their influence came across in your work? The first jokes most of us hear as children are dad jokes, and Brad, at least, is lucky if he can go 15 minutes without telling one of those. Dave, I don't know, might have been raised by a very quiet family of Amish craftsmen. Who he knew, who insisted that you never compliment their work or they would flee in embarrassment. Tell us a little about your dads and how they helped you gain a healthy sense of humor. Thanks and happy Father's Days, guys. Well, that's great. That's great. Brad, actually, I have a quick question for you. This is a side note. Yeah. You grew up in semi-Amish country, right? In the northern part of...
You know what? There were no Amish that I was aware of in Michigan, in the part of Michigan, in the thumb of Michigan, as I was growing up. I didn't really know about the concept of Amish until I was much older.
Oh,
I mean, they were there. Let me put it to you differently. They were there. In fact, I found out later that my grandmother on my mom's side hated the Amish, had some kind of a feud going on with them. But it wasn't something that I dealt with growing up on a regular basis. It was later on. You got a little bit further out in Huron County, and then you started to find out about the Amish and stuff. But it wasn't a real part of my childhood. No.
Wow, what a weird people to hate. That's I love that there was a feud.
Yeah,
you know who I hate are the people that keep to themselves and are quiet and.
So I'm living in Ohio, and Carolyn and I are just dating, and I'm trying to find some excuse to entice my parents to come and visit because they really don't like leaving Huron County. I think I've told you before, after we moved to Philadelphia, they visited us in Philly 3 times. Once when we got the house, once when Carolyn was pregnant with Alex, and once when Carolyn was pregnant with Max. And I got a vasectomy, so we're going to get no more visits. We're done. but they don't like living in, or they don't like leaving Huron County, and especially now that they're older, they really don't like traveling long distances. But this was when we were living in Ohio. Carolyn and I was like, let's find, maybe they would like to bring Grandma down and have her visit. We could tell them that would be a great reason for a visit. And I said to my mom, you could bring Grandma, who would be obviously her mom. I said, you could bring Grandma and we could go visit the Amish. And my mom just paused and said, oh, Brad, your grandmother hates the Amish.
What?
And that's the only explanation I ever got.
Brad,
that's the only explanation I ever got.
Before people pass, you have to figure out what that's about. That's so weird. I've literally never heard of somebody like, oh, I can't stand the Amish. Oh boy.
And it was like that tone of voice that had a finality to it. It was like, oh no, she hates the Amish, and that's all we're going to say. I do have to ask her now that time has gone and enough water has gone under the bridge. Maybe I'll have to ask her what that backstory was.
I mean, was somebody in her family killed by a beautifully built chair or something?
No, maybe they were run over by a buggy. And I passed up my great chance of using my first dad joke of the show by saying that the Amish drive her buggy. But 10
minutes later, well, you still got it in. All right.
But no, I'm going to have to go back and ask because it does sound like there's a good story there. But
well, the key joke to make here, and this is always true with anything electronic, is going, well, great job, Brad. Now you've scared away all of our Amish listeners. Good job.
Yeah, exactly. But but no, no Amish in my background. But I will tell you a little bit about my dad because this is This is a great topic for me. There's so much of my dad that comes through in what I do. It's first of all, so anybody that listens to the podcast and they make a remark about the podcast, specifically me, what's the first thing they say, Dave, about me in regards to the podcast? They like hearing what?
They always say, the first thing, like whether we see him in person or whether they email, and they're always like, Brad Geiger, he hates the Amish. That's the first thing they say.
Son of a gun. No,
they always say your laugh.
Yeah.
They're always like, oh, your laugh lights up my day. Oh, I love your laugh. Oh, your laugh makes my smile turn upside down or frown turn upside down.
My laugh is 1/10 of my dad's laugh.
Oh, really? That's adorable. Is that true?
Oh, yes. Yeah. He's got such a distinctive, amazing, he's got a well-crafted laugh that I have no idea where it came from. It sounds a little, you remember how Barney Rubble used to laugh?
Oh, yeah.
That that's my dad to a small, but dad is maybe exponentially 3 or 4 times that. He's got
Brad, can I give you an assignment for Christmas? Yeah. When you go home for Christmas, you've got to record him.
Oh, yeah. I might have to do that. We're going up there in July, so I'll see if I can serendipitously get a good recording.
God, it's kind of a morbid thought, but it would be lovely to have our parents' laughter recorded. Both of us.
Yeah. That's not a bad idea.
I don't know why I've never thought about that. That would be kind of a sweet thing to have someone, because what a wonderful way to remember somebody is by their laugh. You know?
Because it's always the warmest moments. So I remember before we moved into the house, we moved from a small house to a big house exactly once in our lifetimes, right? But I remember this would have been when I was maybe 8 years old. Maybe even younger than that. We were in the small house. We were watching ABC's Wonderful World of Disney. Remember when that would come on and it would, Tinkerbell would come up and it was in full color, right?
Yep.
And there was a cartoon where these bears were picking up trash. And they were picking up trash and then doing this, like where they bump with their hips to each other.
Right.
And the park ranger was whistling, and there was a whole song that went along with it. And my dad started laughing, and he got into this laughing fit. I swear to God, the windows started rattling because he was laughing so hard. He was just like out of control, laughing at these fucking bears. It's one of my earliest and one of my absolute warmest memories of my father is him literally rolling on the ground watching these bears on Disney pick up trash. It's one of those things that's indelible, one of your very, very youngest memories.
Right.
So the first thing I got to say is his laugh. And the second thing is all through growing up, he was a coach. So he coached softball. Back in the day, they had like adult softball leagues that in Huron County were quite serious and quite competitive. And it was a big deal. And he coached softball. And that really was our summer, was traveling with dad to the different tournaments, either in local towns or out into the state. Going to tournaments, traveling for softball, and watching him coach. And then, of course, he coached baseball teams that me and my brothers were on. Later on, he coached bowling. He was just named the coach of the year by the Detroit Free Press for his division in bowling. And he's always been a coach. And I would watch him at key moments during specifically a softball. I would watch him when his team was down by a couple of runs, and he would gather the players in a circle, and he would deliver some of the most amazing, like heart-pounding speeches to rally his troops to get them to go out there and score the runs that needed to be scored. And I would watch him take a player who was struggling, and the way he would talk to that player and the way he would get through to that player and the way he would interact and the way he would praise people who were doing great and the way he would lift people who were struggling all of that, I just sat and soaked that in year after year after year. So sometimes, like Dave, you'll point out, well, geez, you're doing an awful lot with webcomics.com and the Webcomics Handbook, and we do the show together. And you note that I do an awful lot of outreach. Some of that is just in my DNA, because that's one way. Because listen, I could never hit the ball. I could never be that. I could never be a coach like he was, but I can be a coach like he was in my own arena. And so it's something that I find very, very enriching and makes my soul happy when I'm able to do that same kind of thing that I saw him doing in my own area, and kind of mimic that thing that I had such high regard for growing up. That's in my DNA, and that if ever maybe you've said, oh geez, Brad said something that I really appreciated, or maybe said it in such a way that it really got my attention. If that's ever happened, that's John Guigar. That's him coming out. And that's a big reason that I'm doing this right now. It's a big reason I'm talking right now.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how also, I mean, so separate from the paying it forwardness, what was he like when I don't know, 10, 12, 13-year-old Brad was drawing? What comments did you get from your pop around that?
That's wonderful in its own way. He did not get art. He didn't get it. He didn't understand it. He had no appreciation for it, but he supported it 110%. Like he got me art courses. He made sure that I was able to go to a good school. He was supportive to the nth degree, in the same way that I find myself supporting, like when my son plays Minecraft. And I look at it and I'm like, I have no idea even what you're doing, but good on you. I know you're building spatial skills and all kinds of other things, but it's so alien to me. And he did not get it, but he supported it 100%, even to the extent that now still, I think I told you a couple of weeks ago, I was telling him how I hired an assistant, and his first words were, "You're busy enough that you need an assistant?" So he has,
oh boy,
he's got no idea what I do, but he's proud of it nonetheless, and he's supportive of it. And I guess at the end of the day, that's what really counts.
Yeah, absolutely. Boy, can I relate to the idea that like has no idea what it is, but is supportive of it.
Yeah. Is that the way it is between you and your dad?
Well, yeah. I mean, between both my folks, I think they are. So I guess to back up a little bit, my dad growing up was inarguably a genius. Like he is a medical doctor and has two specialties. So he basically has two doctorates in two different fields of medicine, and he also raised 7 kids. So he was a busy dude growing up.
Wow.
And like ostensibly had to be a serious dude because he had to feed 7 mouths and he had to take care of all his patients and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, he was a captain in the Navy too, all that stuff. But here's what I remember about, like, he could have been a very serious, stern father with like, oh, I'm a doctor, blah, 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 and I've got 7 kids, blah, 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 blah.
Oh,
but
I'm
here's the thing, though. Look out, here I come, I'm a doctor. But my dad had a joy and a silliness to him that was delightful. Like, book smart, but world silly, if that makes sense,
Wow, I like that phrase.
He was joy-filled, for lack of a better phrase. He was constantly, and I don't know if you've noticed this about my personality, Brad, he was constantly coming up with songs and with little poems. It's like the Irish in him. He was constantly coming up with lyrics or limericks and little poems. And he would come up with songs about like his kids, like, oh, here comes Tom, he's walking along, or here comes Pat, he's doing something. Whatever the kid was doing, walking into the room, my dad would have a little limerick or a song for him. And we all had nicknames, and I also remember things like he had no idea about pop culture. Like he did love to read serious stuff, but he had no idea about pop culture. So he would walk in on me watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and there'd be a Klingon on the screen. And of course, to a doctor, this is how he equates he goes, "Hey, look at old sacral bone head on the old screen there." And so that's how, whenever I was watching Star Trek, that's what he would do. He would walk and be like, "Hey, how are the old sacral bone people? They walking around,
God.
they're doing their sacral bone stuff." And literally, I was like, "What the hell is a sacral bone, Dad? I don't know." And he's like, "It's at the base of your spine. Those people have because he's like, whenever I do a surgery on a spine, that's what it looks like when you open it up. It looks like a Klingon's forehead." I was like, "Oh, interesting.
God,
All right,
that's amazing."
Yeah, and so, well, here's a funny note about him being a surgeon.
Yeah.
So all his kids, none of them ended up being a doctor, right? And I was his last hope. And he's like, "Come on, Davey, you're coming with me to do a surgery today." And I was like, "No, I'm not. I don't want to do this." He's like, "Come on, here, scrub in." And like, I was scrubbing in. He's like, "I've cleared it with the patient. She's very nice. She understands that I want to show you what medicine is."
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm watching a surgery, and I get about 5 seconds into the surgery bed, and you just hear... and I just collapse onto the floor. I just pass right out. I just like, as soon as the scalpel comes out, I'm like, I don't feel so good. Flunk, just flop right on the floor. So anyway, but my dad was silly. He was goofy. He was joy-filled. He was optimistic. Like, even though he had 7 kids, when there were other kids coming from troubled families, we would take them in and help raise them for like half a year or a year until their family got in better shape. And then we would, they were so generous so I think that's why Sheldon is sort of sweet and optimistic and hopeful, is because my dad was sweet and optimistic and hopeful ultimately, you know, and tried to make the world a better place. He was always like, to hell with adding darkness to the world, bring joy into the world, you know?
Yeah.
The world is dark enough as it is. And so I always took that as my launching point, was that point from both my parents, which is be well read, learn as much as you can, but then go out and do good in the world and be joy-filled while doing it. You know, that's what I got.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing there is that, just having spent a little time with you, both of your kids have picked that up from you. There's always a song being sung in the Kellett household. There's always a song, a tune, and very spontaneously. In fact, your kids are quite good at it, at making verse up as they go along. So it's nice to know that comes from a deeper place than even the one that I thought it came from. This is a long honored Kellett family tradition.
Yeah, it really is that that Irish storyteller tradition of like, come up with a song, come up with a poem, come up with a tale, whatever it is.
Yeah,
and so. My 6 brothers and sisters and I, when we would drive across country every summer to go visit my grandparents, those car trips were filled with us making up stories, and so that's how I became a storyteller, frankly, between my folks and my brothers and sisters. We would always be goofing around and always singing a song or telling a limerick and that kind of thing. It was great. You know, it's funny. I don't know why this popped in my mind, but one of my favorite things about those cross-country trips, speaking of my dad, is not a man that really held no evil bones in his body. He's a kind man. And when we would get to Yellowstone every year, or every couple of years, when we would drive across country, we'd go to Yellowstone, and there's different hot springs, right, and different pools and geysers and stuff. And we would always stop at one called the Dragon's Mouth. Mm-hmm. And it's just it doesn't mean anything. It's just a very specific geyser pool. And my dad would always be standing there by himself after the rest of us were kind of trooping back towards the van. And I'd be like, "What are you doing, Pop?" And he goes, "I'm throwing all my hatred for my enemies into this pool." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of beautiful." But that was kind of my dad. He is my dad. He's poetic even in the silly little things that he does, which is like, he was taking that as his meditative moment to cleanse any ill will he had and throw it into this geyser. And I was like, "That's cool. That's a cool poetic way to do it."
And you never asked who his enemies were?
They know who they... You know what, Brad? It was the Amish. But that was a really fun question from a Curious Borg. So thank you for that, because that was fun for Brad and I to walk down that. I think
that made me feel good all over. That's
on a different day. I would when it's nearer to Mother's Day, we should do what was it special about our moms that made us be cartoonists, or the kind of people we are. Because God, I could talk about my mom too for hours and hours.
Yeah, and then we can talk about the Mennonites.
Brad's like, "Oh, I've got some opinions on the Shakers. Oh, you're going to hear some thoughts. You're going to hear some thoughts from Brad Geiger." Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we'll tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
Oh, when you do, you'll get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, no worries.
You can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Leave us a 5-star and a few kind words.
That, and along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, let's talk comics. Okay, Brad, so our next question comes in from Blake Winton, and Blake writes, I was at a conference last weekend and saw this talk, and then he links to a YouTube talk, by someone who's making her comics accessible to some people you might not have thought could enjoy them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether this is something you could do too. And by the way, the people in reference in the video are either blind, sight challenged, or sight impaired. There's differing levels of ways of describing that, and hopefully I capture that correctly. Anyway, Dave and Brad, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether this is something you could do too. I feel like even something as simple as adding alt text to the panels you post could convey much of the humor. So, Brad, we've had different people over the years come to us with ideas, either PhD or tech candidates at different schools, saying like, "Hey, I'm trying to build a comics reader for either the sight impaired, the sight challenged, the blind," and I've never seen it come to fruition in a real world application. And maybe, Brad, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that about every 3 to 4 years, I have someone with the best of intentions come to me saying, "Hey, I'm trying to design this. Would you help out?" And I'm always like, "Yeah, I can supply comic images for you or whatever you'd like." So Brad, here's my question to you then. I'll ask Blake's question directly to you. Is this something that webcomics could do for accessibility, and what would it involve? And how hard or easy could that be for your workflow?
Yeah.
All that sort of stuff.
This falls into a very common category for us, which is really good ideas that come from a place of love and kindness that just, for reasons of simple practicality, probably just aren't going to get done. And that sounds kind of cruel, but the fact of the matter is I've only got so many hours in a day, and I've only got so much time I can put into doing the thing that I do for a living. And the extra time that I would need to put into this is not going to have a return on investment that is going to be significant enough to make it worth my time to do. And as a result, since I've got to take this business seriously, I've got to say no. And even we talk about all the time, well, if you do this extra thing, once you get it set up, it's just going to take you extra 5 minutes. First of all, this specific thing that they're talking about, making it accessible to people that have vision impairment. The fact of the matter is to do it right, it's going to take a lot more time investment of 5 minutes. But let's say that it's 5 minutes. I get really nervous when I start thinking about all of these things that I could do that would just take me 5 minutes. Because if I take on one thing that just takes me 5 minutes, I'm going to be tempted to take on something else that's just going to take 5 minutes, and something else that's going to take 5 minutes. And before I know it, I've lost an hour doing all these little 5-minute tasks, right? When you're doing comics, and specifically when you're doing independent comics, where you may have a day job, or if this is your day job, your time becomes much more important to protect, in my opinion. When that happens, you've got to decide very carefully how you're going to spend your time. And you've got to make sure that there's a decent return on investment for everything that you do. And as a result, for the most part, except for one thing that I am going to point out in a moment, except for one side thing, everything that almost everything that this person is talking about in that video is a great idea that I can tell you that I specifically am just not going to be able to prioritize enough to spend time on. It's a good idea. It comes from a place of love. I think it's fantastic. I just know realistically I can't spend the time on it.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dave?
Well, so that everyone has a reference point, the YouTube video in question here from the JS conference, the European JS conference, is called Crafting Comics for Literally Everyone by Jessica Jordan. And I believe it's about a half an hour talk. I skimmed it. And if you want to get the basic idea of what this technology is, jump to around the 14-minute point, and you can get a sense of what Jessica's doing, which is really clever. It's basically a guided narration through a comic. So like panel 5, image, waves are crashing over a boat. Dialogue, oh no, I'll never see Jim again.
Yeah.
Mood, dark and heavy. So everything that you would need described to you is described in a kind of voiceover text as the cursor moves along the comic, kind of a thing. Is the basic idea.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant, right? It's great. But here's the thing, and it's a point of differentiation, but it's a key one, is that my grandmother, when she went blind, I subscribed her to all sorts of services, one of which was like a custom radio that would read the local newspaper. Brad, I don't know if you've ever heard about these. But it was great. I would sit with her and we would listen to the newspaper, and there would be local readers that would volunteer. And in fact, I signed up, but I never got to do it. I signed up to be a reader once for that service. Yeah. But what I'm getting at here is that it's really hard to ask the local paper to produce that.
Yeah.
But it is good when there are second and third parties that say, like, here is a need, here's some technology that we have that we could apply to this with a little bit of foundational money or a little bit of donations and contributions, we could do X, Y, Z, right? And I feel like there's a similar situation here, which is if someone were to design the software and make it very easy for cartoonists to use, I think you would find a lot of people using it, but it's a big ask for someone who's barely keeping their head above water financially or creatively in terms of time management, to say like, hey, here's another task that could add, 1 to 4 hours every week onto your projects. So and brings you nothing, but is for the betterment of humanity. And there's no argument it is for the betterment of humanity. But it's a big ask, So I don't know what the easy solution here is as far as making comics accessible to either the vision impaired or to the blind. It is something that it needs to be a technological base that cartoonists can tap into, which they themselves can distribute the workload to and say, hey, 400,000 readers or 4,000 readers, whatever the number is. There's a healthy percentage of us that have blind or vision impaired relatives. Why don't we all break up the 4,000 Sheldons in the archives and we'll all try to add alt text to them, right? But Dave Kellett can't individually sit down and do alt text for 4,000. There's 4,500 Sheldons now. There's no way I'm going to go back and do all that, So maybe there is, if a platform allowed for distributed workload, maybe that would help. It's an interesting problem because it's hard to put the workload on an artist who's doing all they can to keep their own head above water creatively and financially, and then give them another administrative task,
Do you remember back in the early days of webcomics, they did a kind of a crowdsourced transcript add-on for webcomics? It had. Do you remember it?
Yeah, Ryan North designed it, didn't he? It was Oh No Robot.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And I think probably like you immediately signed up for that. And there was people that would go through and do the transcriptions and stuff. Did you ever get a sense that anybody actually used it?
No. And in fact, I had a separate transcription in Sheldon in my previous iteration of my website that would then feed into Oh No Robot. And I had nothing to do with it. I don't know how to program that. But my programmer, Philip, of my previous website iteration, had designed it for goats.com, John Rosenberg's site. And so I used it too. And here's the problem with a distributed workload too, is that among the 1,000 or so Sheldons that got transcribed, which are now lost, the transcriptions would vary widely in quality and in what they captured. So for some people, it was hugely important to list out all the props that were seen in the comic strip. For another person, it was hugely important to list out all the scenery and what the mood was. For another person, it was hugely important to list out all the poses that the characters were making, right? And so, like my transcripts page to page would kind of make no sense, because one time it would be like hugely important and heavily leaning on props. The next one was mood. The next one, and so you're like, I just want the text, whatever it is. And even then, with the text, your transcripts would be riddled with typos, because this is all an all volunteer basis, and so they'd be riddled with typos. And anyway, so when Philip's server eventually crashed and I lost all those transcripts, I was like, you know what? Go with God. Good riddance, because none of those were any good anyway. Like they weren't searchable. You would search for stuff and you'd find it like 1/3 of the time what you were looking for. And the rest of the stuff, you would get junk search results because it was either too much data or not the right kind of data. And so anyway, what that process taught me is that it's really hard to capture the right amount of information for capturing what a comic strip is. It's a very unique form of communication, this dance of visual and text and alphanumerics. And it's hard to capture that in pure transcript form.
Yeah, and that's what it came down to. I had exactly the same experience with that. But I will say, I mentioned earlier, there is one thing that I am thinking about doing that would widen the accessibility of my comics. But the reason that I'm thinking about doing it is because I see a much better return on investment in terms of my time. And it also circles around to something else that's happening this summer. And that is this. My older son, who's going to be 17 in a few days, he's very interested in film and audio and visual engineering and particularly documentary film and stuff like this. And his internship that he had been planning on, which was going to take him overseas, unfortunately fell through. And now we're trying to find a few things to keep him busy with around the house, so he's not sitting in front of the PlayStation the entire time. And one thing he was expressing interest in was doing some stuff for me and some like audio visual engineering, including some of the things that I do. So if you've noticed over the last couple of weeks, I've been posting like snippets from my live stream where I might break into a tutorial. Or you've been noticing maybe some time-lapse video that I've been putting up on Instagram and Twitter. And all of that has been a direct result of my being in Los Angeles a few weeks ago with you and speaking with Jake Parker. And Jake saying the benefits that he's gotten from building up his YouTube channel and doing stuff like that. And how he's able to use that to better his career and to make things like his Kickstarters and Patreon approaches go over better. So I've been putting a little bit more steam behind that recently because I do see a good ROI there. And one of the things that I've been really thinking about doing for a long time that I'm circling around a number of iterations of is doing basically an audiobook. Yeah, I know we've joked about doing audiobooks before, but an audiobook style reading of my first book of the new Evil Inc. comics that was published under the title Under New Management. Taking and reading that audiobook style and having a panel by panel view on the video portion. So the video would just slide from panel to panel. The audio would be basically me reading all the different parts in the same way that an audiobook narrator reads the entire thing, maybe changing their voice a little bit here and there for different characters, but mating up that audio with the video of going from panel to panel to create a video audiobook of the first Evil Inc. Collection. That because I could put that out in a number of different ways on YouTube to generate subscriptions and traction there. It would also, as a side benefit, increase the accessibility of Evil Inc. to people that maybe have vision problems, in that it would be narrated in that respect. What do you think about that idea of video audio book of a comic?
Yeah, I think it works. Well, at least it's better than a comic. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it adds a certain accessibility to it. It's not quite what this woman in the video was describing in terms of
No,
complete accessibility, but
definitely not.
but as far as like a project that at least moves towards it, then I concur with you that yes, it does do that.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back around on this idea because I think I want to reiterate how sometimes a comic career is held together by spit and baling wire. And like there are times where everything's efficient and like you feel like you're doing great and you're keeping your head above water. And then there's other times where it's everything you can do just to make it to the next year of making comics. And so I want to talk about this idea about adding accessibility to comics in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Brad, you remember Maslow's hierarchy? It's like a mid-century psychological pyramid chart that says like you've got to take care of air, food, and shelter first. And then it moves up to, I think safety is the next one. And then you start to move into love and belonging. And you move up the pyramid as you get the basic human needs done, right? And so this is one way of describing what Brad and I were saying before about why it's hard for us to make the time for adding accessibility, because on our personal Maslow's hierarchies of needs, month to month, we're going, how do I make the rent this month? How do I make the rent this month?
Right.
What am I currently doing that can get that? And so it's very low on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So even though you're acting creatively, you're still, the basic core of that is like, how can I make money to make a living? How can I make money to do what I got to do? So for me, like my site is run on Shopify, right? And that directly makes me income, my Shopify site. But I can tell you right now, I have on my to-do list about 10 things that I need to go in to fix on Shopify or my listings or things like that. These are things that directly make me money, and I have not yet had the time to do it. Like I can't get the time to do it. Similarly, I need to redesign my websites in the worst possible way because they are no longer compliant to Google's mobile first thing. They're not accessible from different phone and computer screens. They were built 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So they're not up to date on HTML. So that's terrible. And then there's all sorts of things that are breaking either in my archives and so on any given time. There's something I need to fix basically, and it's just me and Beth trying to keep it. It's like 2 little buckets of water trying to throw it out of the boat, right? And so it sounds like it's no big deal to say, well, all you have to do is write up some alt text. That would make it more accessible. And they're right. That could conceivably make it. But then the question is, I have to now redesign my site for a place to put that alt text that it doesn't currently have. And I still haven't had the time to redesign the site in general. So like it's this catch-22 of like, yeah, it's a great idea and I would love to do it. And it makes me sound perhaps cold to think like I can't do it right away. But it's harder than you think to incorporate something like this into a workflow when you're already behind the 8 ball on catching up on all the things you need to do for your business,
Yeah. And the harsh truth is that you've got to have priorities and you've got to direct your time towards the things that are going to have the best return on investment of that time.
Yeah, and that sounds Machiavellian, but it's more how do you survive?
It's strict survival. Listen, if you don't make decisions based on that kind of criteria, you're going to be behind the 8 ball very, very quickly.
Well, I wonder if one of the reasons why I never saw any of this software come to fruition was because it itself could not survive. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No. Well, yeah. Because at the end of the day, also, okay. Now here is where I turn into a complete jerk. But I'm just being honest with you. So you build out all that accessibility. We're in a post-advertising revenue web publishing system. You've increased accessibility so that you can deliver that comic to a wider group. In what way do you get a return on that investment in any way, shape, or form? They're not going to buy a book, most likely, because they're visually impaired. They're not going to deliver ad revenue. They're most likely not going to become a Patreon backer. They're not going to support a Kickstarter.
That one I would disagree with you. I think they would. There's a high possibility they could come a Patreon, especially if you built that out.
Maybe. I'd give you a 50-50 shot on that.
Okay.
Because
Well,
human
let's put it this way,
nature
Brad,
being the way it is, more than likely they're going to say thank you very much for the free comic and go back to doing what they were doing before.
Yeah, so let me put it this way. I'll rephrase what Brad just said. I would say there is a mathematical percentage that will become Patreon backers, but it's like this. For every 10,000 of my Sheldon readers, one becomes a Patreon backer. For every
Right.
10,000 of my Drive readers, one becomes a Patreon backer. So you would need 10,000 visually impaired or blind people to be like one would become a Patreon backer,
That's exactly the point I'm driving at. And as a result, it's just not going to be worth the amount of effort and time that you're going to put into it.
Right.
And that's just that's just the way it is.
And this sounds cold, and it is, but this is where mass media did better, because TV, when it was centralized and making hundreds of millions of dollars, the networks could be forced to say by the federal government, listen, as a trade-off for the public airwaves that you're being given, you have to provide audio text or voiceover services that people can tap into through third-party technology. You know what I mean? So the networks had to produce that because they were being given federal airwaves. But it's really hard to ask a small web cartoonist in, I don't know, Des Moines to be like, no, you've got to provide all this, but the problem is that if none of us do it, well, then a whole big percentage of the population, either the visually impaired or the blind, are not getting to experience comics. And I don't know what the answer is there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because I guess you could ask Go Comics to create it, or Webtoons or Tapas, but I highly doubt that any of those three companies are going to do it, speaking honestly.
Right.
But they would be the best candidates, don't you think, Brad, as a platform to say, here is what we are going to do?
Perhaps, but again, each of the places that you mentioned, it's not a clean conversion, because they don't really own any of the content that they're putting up for the most part. It's all everything that you just mentioned are aggregator sites. Tapas.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, if they provided a tool that artists or readers could then add in transcripts or alt text, you know what I mean,
perhaps,
that kind of thing.
Perhaps
yeah,
it would definitely be a step in the right direction.
Right. But it's hard for me, who doesn't know his way around programming, to then go out and hire someone to say, hey, can you figure out a way to include my alt text so that accessibility readers could bring it into their own software on the computer, which is something I honestly know nothing about. So it's a bigger hurdle than you think it is for an independent cartoonist to suddenly include. And again, this goes back to the basic thing: is like, how hard is it to type out alt text? Well, individually, it's not that hard, but I have no way on my website currently to display that.
Right.
And it would require some form of website redesign to make that happen. So even at the most basic level, it's still an ask, and it's hard for me when I have a to-do list that's a mile long that I'm behind with. But it's funny wrong. Because like I can't exit this conversation without feeling like we're terrible human beings, but I don't know what the other answer is, because that's the realistic answer,
Yeah. No, I'm saying I don't have the guilt that you do. I guess this is a pragmatic issue for me, and it's one of many issues that I say I'd love to be able to do that, and I can see the value in it. I just can't.
Yeah,
and it's okay to say that. It's okay. We can't save the world, and we can't take on things that would harm our business overall if we got distracted by. That don't have a strong return on investment, and I don't think that you need to feel guilty about that. It's one of many decisions that we have to make every week.
Brad, come on now. I grew up in a Catholic household. I'm going to feel guilty about this no matter what way you swing this.
That's true.
I'm going to find a way to feel guilty about this no matter how this goes.
Well, let me see if I can find another topic for you to guilt over. We've got another question brought to us by Jonathan Small, who says, I see that you route all of your social media to patreon.com/ComicLab, which makes sense for trying to maximize Patreon income. But number one, do you host your podcast somewhere else and just never refer to it? Or do you somehow host on Patreon itself? And number two, where will your podcast be if you decide to leave Patreon for some other monetizer? Or do you just not worry about that? Dave. This Jonathan wants to know why we do what we do on social media when it comes to ComicLab and hosting. What's your answer for him?
Well, okay, so there's a couple different answers to this, Jonathan. The big one being that the reason why we do our primary push, or at least I do, towards Patreon, is that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where people listening can directly translate into future shows being made. So when you become a Patreon backer, that literally pays for the editor to edit next week's show, and pays for the hosting on Simplecast and pays all that sort of stuff. And then the follow-up answer is we also have the show permanently hosted. It's on Simplecast. I think the URL, Brad, is comiclabpodcast.com. Is that right?
That's correct. That is absolutely correct.
So and from that website, actually, and I don't know that we've ever talked about this at length, but you can actually make little snippets of the show that are favorites for you to either export as your own audio file, or you can share them on social media, all that sort of stuff. Simplecast does a nice job of making that possible.
It's called the Recast Generator.
That's right, Recast Generator. We do wish that Simplecast could push it onto YouTube, which is what Libsyn used to be able to do. We originally used Libsyn for the first 6 months.
Yeah.
But Simplecast is apparently working on that, so that's a possibility. But for right now, all the archives do live on that comiclabpodcast.com website. And of course, they're already in your RSS feeder if you've subscribed to us on any feed through your podcast app. But Brad, you take a swing at this now. Why do we push Patreon over the other ones?
It's a great question, and it goes down to understanding how podcasts work. It goes down to understanding your medium, really. Because we do promote this very differently than we would promote a webcomic, because podcasting is a different creature, and we fine tune our approach for it. So first of all, we do use patreon.com/comiclab more often than we do anything else, although we do mention the other ones at appropriate times. But what you also see in almost all of our outreach is the phrase available wherever you get your podcast. Because podcasting is the idea of publishing a podcast is a very different thing. People don't go to the website to get the podcast. For the most part, people, and by the way, our analytics bear this out 110%. People go to their podcast app to consume their podcast. So they're going to go to the Apple Podcast app. They're going to go to the Google Podcast app, so on and so forth down the line to the lower ones like Breaker and so on and so forth. They don't go to the website. In other words, it would be a little bit useless to point them to the website because very few people use the website to get their podcasts. If you want somebody to listen to your podcast, in other words, you don't send them to your website. You tell them ComicLab is available wherever you get your podcasts. One sentence. And that covers a multitude of different people who are using a multitude of different ways to get their podcasts. And ComicLab is available on just about every one of them. So they go in, they put ComicLab in, they search it, find it, boom, it's there. Sending them to the URL is not as effective as simply saying wherever you get your podcast, you'll find ComicLab.
So Brad, here's an imperfect metaphor.
Yeah,
you are in the Brad Geiger kitchen. You're cooking dinner, and then all of a sudden you realized, oh dang it, I don't have potatoes.
Right.
And you go, Dave, I got to run to the supermarket real quick to pick up potatoes. And I go, Brad, let me send you to their website. And you're like, no, I need to physically go to the supermarket. No, Brad, I'm going to send you to their website. No, Dave, it's not, I can't get it tomorrow. I need to go get it right now. And so directing people towards the website is a little bit like that. You need to go where people live for podcasts, and where they live is on their apps or on iTunes or on Google Podcasts or on Pocket Cast or Simplecast or any of those apps that pull their apps in. Most people listen to their podcast in a passive way, in the sense that once they've subscribed, it now pushes onto their apps. And so sending them to comiclabpodcast.com is great. They can find out how to plug it into their own individual apps. But for the most part, they're going to search on whatever directory their app or their source creates and populates, and then they're going to just add it to their feed. Don't you think, Brad?
No, you're absolutely right. And the first thing we're going to get as a comment on this is, well, I went to the website, or I go to websites, I do this, I do that. That's great. You're a special person. But, and we've been doing this for a long time now. The analytics bear it out. Most of our traffic is coming through these other sources. So the long story short is we promote Patreon because that's where we're able to monetize this. That's where 9/10 of our community building is happening. That's where we direct people to the Discord server, where the rest of our community building is happening. That's where the game is. Of course, we're still hosting it elsewhere. Of course, it's still available elsewhere. But our push when we're talking about it in social media is always going to point them either available where you get your podcasts or patreon.com/ComicLab.
Well, and I'm going to bring this back around to the accessibility talk because it has to do with Brad's talk about priorities. And this will relate to your own cartooning, however you share it, which is you better make sure, however you're sharing your comics, that you have a way, a highly prioritized way for readers to go, oh, I know how to support them. Right. So I love this comic. Now I know how to buy a book. I love this comic. Now I know how to support them on Patreon. I love this comic. Now I know they have a Kickstarter going on. Like if you put the priority way down low of like, oh, I have a book for sale. Or, oh, hey, I have a Patreon. Like you literally, you have to scream it from the rooftop so that 1,000 of you are listening to ComicLab and one of you will be kind enough to step up and see the value in supporting at patreon.com/ComicLab, right?
Right.
So you have to say it that way so that of the 1,000 listening, one goes, you know what? I do find enough value in this show to support it. And I do like all the things they offer in addition to the show when I join on Patreon. So yes, I will sign up. But if you're like, hey, by the way, we have a Patreon and it's really special and you should join it, then like that pushes the priority of surviving for another day too far down, you know?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that's the name of the game. It, unfortunately, is you've got to know your priorities, because otherwise you're going to start running in circles because you're going to be chasing this fire and that fire and trying to catch up and you never get ahead that way. The way you publish successfully as an independent is like Jake Parker used to say, right? He gets up in the morning and he says, there's one thing that I've got to get done today. And everything else comes after that. And that's all about setting priorities. You know what you got to do. Everything else is after that.
And does it a little bit bum everybody involved out, or does it a little bit bum out everybody involved that we're living in a late stage capitalism and we have to do that? Yeah, a little bit.
Yep.
But you know what? There are infinitely worse fates. And so having to chase that tiger of making a living all the time, there are worse things to have to be done. Thank God we're living in an age where an artist can be making a living by doing that. You know,
right?
I can think of a billion ways that a cartoonist in the 50s would have killed for this kind of a system. So
that's the truth.
You know, so you can rail against the world you live in so much, or sometimes you can just find a way to make it work for you. And so that's why this is a long walk from that question about podcasts. But I think Brad and I basically are saying that. Being able to promote and push the Patreon for ComicLab fits 80% of what we need to communicate at any given time, and so that's the one we push.
Yep, you're absolutely right. We push it like there's like there's a person stuck in the middle of the tube, and we're the next one down.
Yeah, we're behind Andre the Giant. All right, Brad, I've got one last question for you, and we'll close off the day for this. So This comes from Jeremy, and it's Brad Guigar, for your books. For your inside paperweight, do you use 70-pound text or 85-pound text? Folks on the ComicLab Discord said 70 pounds should be good, but I got some samples and they were all 85 pounds and seemed quite nice. Not sure if it's just an upsell or if you find one better than the other. So Brad Guigar, what is your answer to that one?
Okay. So the thing that you're doing right is that you're getting samples from your printer, because that's really the main event right there. You want to hold it in your hands. You want to see how it looks. You want to make sure that you don't go so thin with your paper that the image from one side bleeds through to the other side. You want to try to avoid stuff like that. Going a little heavier and knowing your preferences also for coated versus uncoated stock. Some people, Corey Cassoni loves uncoated stock. in the books that he prints for Scott over at PVP. Me, I like coated stock. I like glossy paper. I think the shiny art is better. But knowing your preferences, knowing what you want to put across is very important, much more important than asking somebody who doesn't know anything about your project what they think that your paperweight should be. So good on you for getting paper samples. Now, here I'll just so you have a frame of reference. I'll tell you that the Evil Ink books that I've been publishing over the last couple of years, my printer doesn't use pounds; they use GSM. And my books, I just looked at my quote, and my inside pages are 150 GSM. And I Googled it, and from what I can see, in terms of coated stock, that's the equivalent of 100-pound inside paper. So I go evidently with a little bit heavier paper yet. What do you use? Oh, and I can tell you, I love it. I like having a nice heavy paper on the inside there. What do you use, Dave?
Well, before I tell you that, and I'm happy to share what I use, but I will say this. If you have a paper or sort of book that you feel like it's going to feel insubstantial, it is very cost effective to invest in a heavier paper, a thicker paper, so that the book feels and looks thicker and heavier. Right?
Yes.
So you can, obviously, if you have a 400-page book or a book like Bone, or, for example, when they're printing a Bible, have you ever noticed how it's like the thinnest, wafer-thin paper for a Bible? It's like almost rice paper. It's so thin. It's because they've got 1 billion pages to have to include into that binding, right? But when you have a book that's like 80 pages, 100 pages, maybe even 120 pages, you can make it look and feel more substantial so that when someone picks up the book, they go, oh, this is a good value, by using a heavier, thicker stock, right?
Right.
So, like Brad, my printer has moved to a worldwide meter standard, which, for God's sakes, America, get it together. Why are we still on the English system? Why? Listen, I know why. It's because we're all stubborn fools, but we've got to catch up on metric. Anyway, so I use 128 GSM matte art paper for my interior. Unlike Brad, I don't necessarily like glossy paper on the interior of a book. In fact, even when I have to use glossy for like color, I try to ask them for the most matte finish, the least glossy finish that I can get on a book.
Yeah.
Because I feel like glossy feels like a heavy gloss, and I don't even think Brad has this either, but a really heavy gloss feels like what somebody in the 1970s would have thought was amazing technology for a book, you know?
Yeah,
and
you're
Brad,
not wrong.
You have a matte gloss too, I think, don't you? You don't use a heavy gloss.
Not a heavy gloss. No, it's not super shiny, but it's enough. It's enough so that my pages, the colors, I think, bounce a lot better off of that page than they would without it.
And by the way, when you add a gloss to a page, whether it's a matte or a gloss or a high gloss, that also adds weight and thickness to the page too. So that's another thing to note. Anyway, so I for Sheldon books and Dry books lately, or for Sheldon books, it's been 4-4 color, which means 4 on one side, 4 colors on the other side, on a 128 GSM matte art paper. And then for my covers, from my soft covers, I've been using a 300 GSM coated one-side artboard. And I've found that I really like that. You can either do French flaps with it or keep it without flaps. It produces a really nice cover. It feels solid. It feels hefty. And so that's what I've used. And then for Drive, I think I use 128 GSM wood-free paper, I believe, so that because it's printed one color without gloss, I think it's wood-free. I don't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
But anyway, you get the basic idea. I'm at 128 GSM. Brad's at 150 GSM, which I think is smart. And then for the cover, I'm at 300 GSM. Brad, did you say you were at for
my
your cover?
soft covers are exactly the same, 300 GSM.
Yeah, and frankly, going too much higher, I wouldn't recommend on a soft cover because you don't want the stiff soft cover.
Right. You want that to have a little give to it.
Yeah, there's a feeling that you want it to be substantive enough, but you don't want it to be so stiff that it's like, oh, this is uncomfortable to read. So I wouldn't recommend going too much higher if you're going to go higher than 300 GSM because you start to feel like an overly starched dress shirt at a wedding, you know?
And it just makes it, in my opinion, it's putting a lot more stress on the spine when that cover is too stiff. You want that cover to bend a little bit while you're opening the book, so it doesn't put all of the force of that action on the spine.
Boy, that's a great point, Brad. You want it to bend like a reed. You don't want it to break like a tree.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, that was a quick answer to a simple question. That's a nice way. If only they could all be that simple, then I could walk away from the show guilt free.
That's right. That's right. That we finally got to a question that you could answer guilt free, except for that whole thing where you're using wood-free paper and probably putting a lot of wood farmers out of business.
Brad, don't do it. I don't think you realize how strong the guilt lies within me. I don't think you realize, Bradley. I'm going to go to sleep tonight a little bit troubled, and it's all because of you. So thanks, Brad.
No. Well, I speaking on behalf of lumberjacks everywhere, I'd like to say you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been Brad Guigar, the editor of Webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
ComicLab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab, so we're going to say that twice. Patreon.com/ComicLab. I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night and I work all day.
He's a lumberjack and he's okay. He sleeps all night and he works all day. I cut down trees, I eat my lunch, I go to the lavatory. On Wednesdays I go shopping and have buttered scones for tea.
You did that great with a British accent and everything.